Housing Wire reports that Bill Pulte, the new director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, plans to scrutinize what he calls an underperforming Fannie and Freddie. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Now, the new head of the agency oversees both Fannie and Freddie Mac, but also the Federal Home Loan Bank. And he says that the GSE's workforce of about 15,000, that's a lot of people, have struggled with safety and soundness, but he gives no real specifics. But it should be noted that these agencies generate about, $30 billion in annual income. So they're generating money, which goes, of course, to the U.S. Treasury. So they're not sitting there doing nothing, right? So $30 million a year. Now, speaking of workforces, I want to point something out to you that I found very interesting from Mr. Pulte's X account, formerly Twitter. So let's just take a quick look at that in just a moment. All right, so here we are on Mr. Pulte's official page on X, formerly Twitter, and let's talk about the staffing issues that he's seeing right now. So I found a couple of videos that are quite interesting. Let's take a look at one of these, which speaks to the staffing at Fannie and Freddie.
Monday, knock, knock, nobody's home. Look at this. Got this big, beautiful area where employees are supposed to work.
Where are
Nobody's
they?
here. So we're in the second headquarters at Freddie Mac. We were just in the other building. There was nobody there for miles and miles and miles. Look at these desks. They're clean. We've got a cafeteria, again, that's completely vacant. You've got food that's being prepared.
Anyone want a sandwich?
Staff that makes the food is here 5 days a week, but the people who work in this building or should work in this building aren't here 5 days a week.
Very interesting. And then there's one other video that kind of gives you some of the specifics of the numbers. Let's check that out.
One of the things that we discovered pretty quickly was there was about 2,900 people that were supposed to work in the building. Turns out only 49 were showing up full time on a 5-day.
No, slow it down. 2,900 people? How many showed up?
49?
On average, the highest that we saw on a 5-day work week was 49 people. And this would be at Fannie Mae. And Freddie Mac has a similar problem. We're going to fix it. President Trump hired a businessman to do this, and we're going to fix it for him.
So just to be fair, I did a search on Google and I said, how many people are working remote at these agencies? Because I think that's very important to understand. So let's just do a quick Google search here. I'm going to show you. Give me a minute. So let's see what the all-knowing Google has to tell us, right? The great oracle that Google is. And it says Fannie Mae doesn't provide a public release of the exact number of their employees that are working remotely, but there is a survey that may give us a clue. It says that 35% of the workers are in a fully remote or hybrid situation. So they're working either at home all the time or coming into the office and working remotely. So just 35%, which does not explain a vacancy rate of employees that exceeds 90% that Mr. Pulte just showed on those two short videos. Very interesting. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Mr. Pulte, he is the grandson of Pulte Homes founder William Pulte. If that name sounds familiar, that's one of America's largest home builders. Housing Wire reports he was also a private equity investor who founded a nonprofit called Detroit Blight Authority, and their focus is on removing abandoned and rundown properties. But getting back to the column from Housing Wire, let's look at his focus for the agency in the coming years. And that is to eliminate mortgage fraud in general. That's going to be his primary focus. And of course, no one can fault him for that. But this is a concern that I have, and it is the Project 2025 playbook, which Trump denied he had anything to do with, yet it does very closely align with the direction of the administration today. Now, that is to remove Fannie and Freddie Mac from their conservatorship. That is something that's been in place for over 16 years because in 2008, just following the housing crash, the federal government bailed out both of those agencies for a price tag of $187 billion. And that came about due to risky and unsound lending practices and also the collapse of mortgage-backed securities. So here we are 16 years later, and they're still functioning under a federal conservatorship. So the Trump administration would like to push them back into the private sector where they had originally been. We'll see if that happens. But if it does, it could create some serious upheaval in the U.S. housing market. There is something else that came to light that I want to bring to your attention, and that has to do with FHA. And their single family production report is where we get case number assignments. That is the number of home equity conversion mortgages that were submitted for an application and then assigned an FHA case number. We had actually October's report, but then they stripped that out of the page about a month ago. So now our latest report is September, but then my friend Jim Veal let me know that, hey, go to the single family production report and tell me what you see. And look at this. Requested page can't be found. So, yep, we got a 403 error when you try to do the single family production report. So that is concerning as well. But when it comes to FHFA, which is our story here at the moment, we'll keep you updated on any planned changes or layoffs. And of course, most importantly, potential impacts on reverse mortgage lending. Many financial columnists and pundits typically echo this common refrain that we've heard for decades when speaking about reverse mortgages. And it's, what about the kids, right? Like mom and dad are robbing something that's owed to the children if they get a reverse mortgage. Well, this recent CBS Money Watch column really takes a more holistic and I would venture to say a fair-minded approach. So let's take a quick look at this. First, it begins by explaining what is a home equity conversion mortgage, how does it work, and what are the requirements, and what it can do, which is converting some of your equity or property wealth, I like that term, property wealth into tax-free cash without the burden of monthly payments. But let's look a little bit further. So how a reverse mortgage impacts generational wealth. Well, unlike a traditional loan, of course, we're going to have a growing loan balance over time because there are no required monthly payments. And to be quite frank, hardly anyone is making them. Lisa Moriello, a name that many of you are familiar with, is cited in the column. She's the National Retail Sales Director at Loan Depot. And she says, when used strategically, a reverse mortgage can actually help support generational wealth. I think that's interesting, so let's see what she has to say. She say it may provide financial stability, preserve other assets, and even enable proactive gifting to heirs, which I think would be a living inheritance where you give them something a little bit sooner. Now, here are some of the benefits. One is preserving investments. So if you have a couple or an individual who has significant retirement accounts invested in equities that are at risk of loss, they can help preserve those assets by using a reverse mortgage in years when the market's down. Rather than making those realized losses, they can keep those investments in the market and they can get returns on those. But in the meantime, they can pull it from the HECM's line of credit. She also notes tax-free income, unlike withdrawals from retirement accounts, which are certainly taxable, as we know, because they've been tax deferred during the accumulation period. A reverse mortgage doesn't create taxable income. That's because it's not income. It's simply loan proceeds. And then non-recourse protection, which is very important. Let's look a little bit further. So there are also the downsides of a reverse mortgage. It can reduce inheritance value of the home because the equity is being slowly consumed or rapidly, depending on the interest rate and the balance. And then we have the eligibility requirements and the upfront costs. But who should get a reverse mortgage? That's always the question. She says these three questions should be considered by the older homeowner before they do it, especially if they're concerned about passing on generational wealth. And the first question is, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the goal? Is it to try to supplement your cash flow each month, covering healthcare expenses, or preserving other assets? Second question is, how much money do you need and when? That's very important. And the reverse mortgage, as we know, has very flexible payout options from lump sum, 10-year payments or term payments, or the line of credit. And then lastly, how does it compare to your other options to extract equity from a property? And those would be HELOCs, of course, or cash out refis when compared to a reverse mortgage. So you want to see which one of those may be the better choice. So kudos to CBS News and also to Lisa Moriello for kind of expanding the general public's understanding of reverse mortgages and how they can actually help pass on generational wealth. So I thought this was a more fair-minded article, which we typically don't see in the media. So good to see. Well, BlackRock, yes, a very famous hedge fund. Their CEO, Larry Fink, has put the conversation of Social Security reform square into the spotlight once again. And he's making a suggestion that is controversial. That is to let Americans invest part of their Social Security into private accounts for retirement. Now, I'll just be honest with you. It would be very easy to dismiss this idea altogether because it's coming from a hedge fund manager, right? After all, wouldn't he stand to benefit? But before we do that, let's just take a little bit of a closer look at this Forbes column and see what's up. I think this is a very important conversation, especially for us as reverse mortgage professionals, because mathematically, Social Security is not sound. It just doesn't work because we do not have enough present workers contributing to the fund to offset the number of retirees who are drawing benefits. So BlackRock's CEO mentioned these potential reforms, or suggested reforms, I should say, during the company's retirement summit. And he said that doing this plan, allowing part of the Social Security funds to be put into private accounts would, in fact, give higher returns to the market. Adding, the problem we have now is we have a plan called Social Security that doesn't grow with the economy. So his plan is centered on boosting returns by harnessing the stock market's long-term performance, which we cannot deny. The question is what happens with short-term volatility. Now, he adds that Social Security's trust funds right now are only invested in U.S. Treasury bonds that have very modest yields. By contrast, putting a portion of the Social Security contributions into stocks could really help increase the individual's wealth and standard of living in retirement. As contrasted to private investment into the market, today Social Security funds are invested in a special U.S. Treasury bond that has modest yields, according to Fink. Now, if you look at the stock market returns, it would create a plan that would allow every American to participate in the economy, and he suggested owning a stake in real estate would make workers more optimistic about their golden years. Now, the problem with this particular plan is we are already behind in contributions. As I just mentioned, there are not enough workers contributing to Social Security to offset the benefits being paid out to the number of retirees, which is ever increasing. So this plan, I think, is DOA. Plus, let's just face it, Congress doesn't like to touch anything to do with Social Security. That's why it's called the third rail of politics. You don't want to touch it or zap, your political career is dead. And this is why, folks, things do not get fixed in Washington, D.C. They just kick the can down the road. Now, it says that AARP, of course, as we know, is one of the nation's largest advocates for seniors. Marie F. Smith, former president of the organization, told the Times in 2024 that they adamantly oppose replacing any part of Social Security with individual accounts, but added that AARP does support encouraging or incentivizing people to establish their own private account. So here's the rub with Social Security. Number one, it's mandatory contributions. If you're a W-2 employee, that is taken out as a FICA tax. Your employer pays half, you pay the other half. If you're self-employed, you get the privilege of paying both parts. So these are mandatory. But it also cuts into the available funds that can be invested in an individual retirement account or stock portfolio. But this isn't the first time that the privatization of Social Security has been floated. In fact, during President George Bush's administration, they had the idea of letting workers invest a portion of their funds into personal accounts. So this is not the first time we've seen that, but again, it met fierce resistance at that time, even from members of the Republican side of the House. So Americans weren't fully convinced that turning a guaranteed benefit, and that's really the rub with Social Security, into a market gamble was worth it. So you're going to have to either hold on to the security of knowing I'm going to get this amount of money every single month. And of course, you have cost of living adjustments. These can be seen in one's statements from Social Security. And critics are warning that diverting payroll taxes to Wall Street could force benefit reductions or cuts, or even increase the the federal deficit further. So very interesting plan. But again, as you know, as a reverse mortgage professional working with older homeowners, Social Security is top of mind. And I wanted to bring this story to you this week just so you can see what the conversation is around the program.